always treat you like kings and queens.
WOCA, Ocala. Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, 5 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in this Tuesday morning. Again, I apologize for my voice. It's a cold going on. and I got that little thing going on. Okay. I wanted to tell you something I thought was kind of interesting. I saw it on Facebook the other day. It was a kind of a fun thing somebody put together. And it was how Facebook might have looked or what kind of posts might have been posted if Facebook had been around when, and then you fill in the blank, when Jefferson lived, when Lincoln lived, when whoever lived, okay? So one of them was Lincoln. And the post that Lincoln put that, was like, got great seats going to the theater with the missus tonight. Got balcony seats. And then, and it was just, one of those, it's like, yeah, that probably would be what would happen if you were, if Facebook was around back then. It is interesting to look at things that we're so familiar with from a different angle. Whether it's a physically different angle, as National Geographic does all the time, or in the next interview, it's looking at the assassination of President Lincoln from a different angle. Absolutely. This is so fascinating. Thomas A. Bogar is on the phone, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Thomas. He's a theater historian. He's a journalist. He served as a judge for Washington, D.C.'s Helen Hayes Theater Awards, and his book is called Backstage at the Lincoln Assassination, The Untold Story of the Actors and Stagehands at Ford's Theater. What a fascinating, different way of looking at something we feel familiar with. Good morning, Thomas.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
And am I pronouncing your last name okay?
You are. You're pronouncing it great.
Okay. And again, I apologize. I got a cold, so it sounds like it. So, well, thank you for being on the air with us. Yeah, I love the idea that you've taken this idea and you're showing us something that we're familiar with, but from a different angle.
Well, it's funny. My background being theater history, I tend to look at everything through that prism. And people forget that the assassination of Abraham Lincoln took place in a theater done by an actor in front of a live audience. And so the context for me was, this is a theatrical occasion, not occasion, but a theatrical historical event. And I started looking in terms of research. The previous book had been on presidential theater going, and I had collected all this information about the assassination, including that playbill for Our American Cousin that lists all the actors and the people and the managers. And I thought, who are these people? Certainly somebody's written a book about who all the actors were. And you would have thought that everything that I picked up, every book that I looked at, mentally you're sitting in the audience looking up at the stage, and instead of what I wanted to tell was the story of what it felt like to be backstage.
Oh, wow.
Performing out to the audience. And the strange thing, too, every book that I picked up either follows John Wilkes Booth out the back door to his manhunt in that Death in the Burning Tobacco Barn, or it follows the mortally wounded president being carried across the street to his death in the Peterson House, and nobody seemed to care about these 46 actors and managers and stagehands left in the theater. The army's marching in, and the crowd in the street is chanting, "Burn the place down." The audience is swarming up onto the stage. The gas man is frantically turning down the footlights so their clothes don't catch on fire, and it's just hysteria inside the theater. They're terrified.
Oh, wow. So as a historian, and you're trying to tell a story as well as history, did you have some gaps that you had to speculate, or were you able to find enough to make it all?
There were huge gaps. I was able to find it, fortunately, but it was a difficult route. The best resource I found, Harvard Theater Collection, has great collection of letters and photographs, as well as so much that's digitized now. You can go down to the Library of Congress and search by name or word virtually any newspaper that's ever been written in the U.S. back to the Revolutionary War, and the same thing at the National Archives with all of the military records, Union, Confederate, everything, even going back to the Revolutionary War. I started searching the census records And that was interesting, too, because some of the actors performed under different names, or they moved around from city to city in their touring. Some of the actresses, in order to avoid bringing shame on their families because acting was looked down on as a profession, they would drop their surname when they performed, or their birth dates changed. I thought that was kind of interesting that on the census records, for every 10 years that they aged, some of the actresses moved their birth date up 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Was John Wilkes Booth part of a traveling troupe, or was he like a stationary part of the ensemble cast there for a while?
He was, at that time, what we'd call a free agent. A lot of people mistakenly think that the actors that night were Laura Keene's acting company, but it was just she touring with John Diet and Harry Hawk, and the rest of them were actors connected with Ford's Theater and his stock company. But John Wilkes Booth was footloose at that time. He hadn't acted for at least a month. He told everybody he had given up acting. He was in the oil business. Actually, he did invest money in Pennsylvania oil wells. But he hung around the theater so freely. He got his mail delivered there, and he was friends with everybody. He was looked up to, idolized, especially the stagehands. It'd be like, imagine today, say Brad Pitt or Johnny Depp going backstage and saying to the stage crew, "Come on, boys, let's go out and have a drink." So
Wow.
They looked up to him.
Oh, really?
So charismatic that everybody loved him, and they even overlooked the rants that he made against the North during the war. He was so open to secessionism. It's amazing that nobody ratted him out.
Okay, and that's another important point. Remind me of my history. Was it like 6 days after the war ended that Lincoln was shot, or something like that, right?
It was, exactly. Appomattox had happened that Sunday, and this was Friday. It was Good Friday, actually, which was ordinarily bad theater attendance evening. And Laura Keene, who was the star, had unwisely scheduled Good Friday as her benefit night, meaning that she would get all the box office for that night. But Abraham Lincoln loved her performances. He had seen her perform before,
Right,
and he came that night knowing that his attendance, and it was supposed to have been General Grant too, but the Grants didn't show up because Mrs. Grant didn't like Mrs. Lincoln, knowing that their attendance would boost the box office for Laura Keene that night.
Oh, wow. And you know, just this is maybe an aside more than an actual on-target question with what we're talking about, but knowing showbiz people, there's ego always involved. Was there an ego issue here? Was John Wilkes Booth jealous that Lincoln was getting more attention? I mean, is that part of it, or was it truly... I mean, this is all speculation.
That's a great question. No, that's a great question. Of all the thousands of questions I've gotten on this, nobody's ever asked me that. And Booth certainly did have his share of ego. He was full of himself. He knew how talented he was. I don't know that it was an ego question with Lincoln. He just detested Lincoln and the North. Booth had found his early fame, his early success in the South. And he loved the South. And so that was part of it. He used to get into huge arguments with his older brother, actor Edwin Booth, over the issue because Edwin was a staunch Unionist. And in fact,
wow.
A short time before the assassination, they'd gotten into just a huge argument, almost broken off connection because of it.
So when we read the book, again, if you're just tuning in, the book is called Backstage at the Lincoln Assassination, The Untold Story of the Actors and Stagehands at Ford's Theater. Are we a fly on the wall, so to speak, and experiencing that event through their eyes?
We're more than a fly on the wall. We're on the stage with them performing. I try to include that morning what it was like because remember, these people are rehearsing and performing a different play every night. So it's a long day for them. And as they're rehearsing that morning, it was a beautiful April morning, not unlike today. These people were just going to work. That was what motivated me too because I thought, what must it have felt like to have the President of the United States assassinated where you worked by one of your most respected, admired colleagues while you were standing nearby? And these people just went to work. They were rehearsing the play. And along the way, I also tell the story of Our American Cousin because most people aren't familiar with the play today. It's pretty hokey, but it does...
Oh, really? Yeah, I don't know it. I know the title only... Yeah.
It's a kind of Yankee humor that Abraham Lincoln loved. It's rural, it's kind of hokey, but The central character, Asa Trenchard, is this Yankee who has a heart of gold. He's not well educated, but he always does the right thing. And it's the kind of humor that Lincoln had always enjoyed, along with, of course, Shakespeare and opera. He was amazingly eclectic in his theatrical tastes.
So, what did John Wilkes Booth hope to gain by murdering President Lincoln? I mean, did he know of somebody that would for sure take his place that met up with his standards and who should be president, or how would that affect him?
He didn't think it through very well. He only changed it to an assassination that day around noon. For months it had been an abduction attempt. It was a really harebrained scheme. He and some of his cronies were going to wait for Lincoln to come to the theater, turn the lights out, and lower the president over the edge of the box, take him out to the back alley, and spirit him away up to Baltimore and then down the Chesapeake Bay to Richmond and hold him ransom to exchange for Confederate prisoners. They had tried it twice already that spring, and it failed both times. He had some of the actors and stagehands who were involved with that. In fact, a month before the assassination, one of the actors, John Matthews, had rented the very room across the street in the Peterson house in which Lincoln would die. And that afternoon in March, some of the other actors, Ned Emerson and John McCullough, and their friend John Wilkes Booth, hung out in that room, and Booth even lay down, smoked a cigar, and took a nap on the very bed that Lincoln would die on a month later. So Booth had he never told them that he changed it to an assassination.
So some of them were in on the original plan.
As well as I can tell, I never found stone cold proof, but I do know from eyewitnesses that he was asking them to help, and I do know for sure that John Matthews, who played the villain that night, Booth gave him a letter that afternoon on Pennsylvania Avenue explaining what he was doing and why he was killing the president, and he asked Matthews to give it to the newspapers the next day. The problem is it was sealed, and Matthews is stuck in his pocket. And Matthews gets back to his rented room in a different boarding house that night, opens the thing up, reads it. He's terrified, tears it up, burns the pieces, goes to his priest and says, "What should I do?" And the priest says, "Get out of town." So Matthews goes up to Canada, and he's never even questioned.
Oh, my.
So how do we know that story then? Does he eventually tell it?
Other people tell it, and he tells it himself. It's amazing. Once Edwin Booth died in 1893, enough time had passed, they started giving interviews. Some of them were obscure, too. One actress gave her whole interview in a Huron, South Dakota paper in early 1910s, another one in Los Angeles around 1916, so that once I tracked down the statements that they gave, they were pretty free in admitting what they did decades later.
Oh, wow. That must have been exciting for you to find those things when you found that, those newspaper clippings.
It was remarkable. So much that's in the book it has never been published before because nobody really looked for information on these actors and stagehands. Well, the managers, too. Poor John Ford, he owns the theater. He's down in Richmond that night seeing to family affairs, and he leaves his 21-year-old brother, Harry Ford, in charge of the theater. Imagine being 21 and being in charge of the theater that night. The three Ford brothers are locked up. They're arrested. They're taken to Old Capitol Prison. They're interrogated repeatedly. They're held for over a month, never charged, and ultimately let go. But their names were forever tarnished by the association of it being Ford's theater.
Wow. Well, tell me about the theater itself. I've never been. I know you can visit the theater, but was it considered a big, fancy place to go, or was it just an average theater?
It was really just an average theater. Its big competition was the one known then as Grover's. It's the National Theater today, same spot, just a newer building. That was a little fancier, and it tended to attract more of the unionists. Ford's Theater was kind of known as a, I wouldn't say, maybe even a hotbed of secessionist thought, because so many of the actors and so many of the stagehands at Ford's Theater were based in Baltimore, and John Ford brought them down from Baltimore as he needed. And Baltimore, if you remember your history during the Civil War, was a central secessionist area. There was a great deal of Maryland from Baltimore on down to the Eastern Shore that favored the South. And these people were open in their secessionist thought. There's one reason that Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, so that he even had some of the Maryland legislature arrested so they wouldn't vote to secede and really cut off Washington.
No, this is fascinating. And as I said in my intro, this is a way of looking at something we're familiar with, but from a different angle. And I love that. The book is called Backstage at the Lincoln Assassination, The Untold Story of the Actors and Stagehands at Ford's Theater. It is written by our guest, Thomas A. Bogar, and he is a theater historian and a journalist, and just such a fascinating discussion we're having. And our phones have been ringing, so let me, if you don't mind, take some of these calls. Are you okay with that?
Sure. Absolutely.
And good morning. You're on the air with Thomas Bogar. Thank you for calling and for waiting.
Good morning, sir. It's very interesting, but do you mention the fact that President Lincoln at that time had an assigned bodyguard that was supposed to have been outside the door to his booth, and supposedly would have stopped him? And from what I understand, John Wilkes Booth had plans to stab the bodyguard and still carry out the assassination, but the bodyguard was in across the road in a tavern getting
oh, really?
Loused up, and there was nobody there to actually protect the president at that time, what he was supposed to be. Now, do you think history might have been changed had the bodyguard been doing his job?
Well, even though Parker,
to your response.
All right, thank you.
Even the guard Parker being next door in the saloon and being kind of a lush, there was still another man who was guarding the door, but all Booth did was waltz by and hand him his card. Booth used to say, "My name is my passport." He could go anywhere, north, south. He was so famous. And often when Lincoln would go to the theater, people would come to see him with either news about the war, important dispatches, or just celebrities. He loved to invite actors to come in and see him in his box. So Booth used his celebrity to show his card and get by the one other man and go on in. It was such a different world then, too. The little guarding that they did. I found an occasion, even during World War II, when FDR was attending the theater in Washington, and he had one Secret Service agent standing out at the curb. It was, the 19th century, and even in the early 20th century, it was such a different world of lax protection.
It's just so sad that Booth had all of that charisma, all of that talent. Like, he must have had money, because you said he was in the oil business. I mean, why would he want to waste everything and lose everything by this act of whatever it is that he called it?
Well, he was so impetuous and unstable. He was really, I think, part of it inherited because his father, Junius Brutus Booth Sr., was a famous alcoholic and unstable who wouldn't show up for performances. And everybody who knew John Wilkes Booth said he was just so fiery and impetuous. And it carried over into his performances and made his performances really exciting and electric. But he was pretty erratic and impetuous and unstable emotionally himself, and he got carried away at the moment. Plus, I started tracking all the people who went to have a drink with him in the saloon next door. There's two saloons next to Ford's Theater. The one on the north side is where the Unionists hung out. The one on the south side, the Star Saloon, is where the secessionists hung out.
Isn't that interesting?
Washington. There were plenty of them in Washington, and I calculated that by the time he actually shot the president, Booth had had at least 7 straight shots by the time he got there. So.
Wow. So the theater itself, was it ever used again? Or I'm guessing that night the play was done. They didn't continue with the play, right?
They didn't. No, there was Act 3, Scene 2, and they never finished the play. In fact, the moment of the shot was one of the biggest laugh lines in the play, and Booth had kind of calculated that he could shoot during that laugh line, and only one actor was left on stage, Harry Hawk. Although, as soon as Booth shot and leapt down to the stage, Harry Hawk ran off stage. As it turns out, Hawk had been seeing one of John Wilkes Booth's fancy women, and Booth had said to him, "If I ever catch you with her again, I'll kill you." And so he thought, leaped down that he was coming to kill him. But they closed the theater down, and it's over 100 years. It's not until 1968 that Ford's Theater reopens. They converted it afterwards. The government bought it. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton was just determined it would never reopen as a theater. He was adamant about that. And so they converted it into a warehouse for war records. The strangest coincidence there is that on the day of Edwin Booth's funeral in 1893, Ford's Theater collapsed, killing 26 clerks who were working in there.
Oh, wow. So the actor left on stage. Let me go back a little bit. He was seeing one of John Wilkes Booth's fancy women. That's what you said. Now, what's a fancy woman?
A lady of the... They used to call them a lady of the pavement, I think.
So she was a hooker. She was a hooker?
Well... That's what we would have. The term actually came later after that, but she was. There were so many houses of prostitution in Washington at that time.
Okay.
In the area that's now the Federal Triangle, where a lot of the federal government offices are, and Booth was a frequenter of some of those houses.
Okay, but he wasn't a pimp. In other words, she was one of the ladies.
No.
He had a favorite.
Oh, so he had a favorite, and he told the actor, "Look, she's mine, even though she does this for a living. I don't want you to pay her."
He was so friendly with them that it's not even sure that he even needed to pay in some cases. one of them who was so enamored of him that when he was caught, she tried to kill herself.
Oh, wow. I never knew any of these little details.
No.
Wow.
That's why hopefully people will
That's why you
read the book.
That's why you wrote your book.
What happened to Mary Lincoln that night? Was she whisked away by the president's side, or did they take her somewhere else?
She goes across the street as they're carrying the president over, but she is absolutely hysterical. She was kind of unstable to begin with, and she's so hysterical and screaming that Edwin Stanton, when he shows up to take charge of things, he orders her out of the room. He says, "Get that woman out of here," and makes her wait in the front parlor as her husband dies in the back room because she was so hysterical.
Wow, what a great storyteller you are, and it's all part of our history here in America. You make me want to go. Where is the theater? It's on Pennsylvania Avenue?
No, it's on 10th and F Streets, which is
okay.
about 3 blocks away from Pennsylvania Avenue, so close by. And it's been beautifully restored today. It looks exactly as it did at the time, at that night. And they have a magnificent museum downstairs with artifacts from it, and a new educational center across the street. In fact, the 4-story glass foyer in the opening of that new educational center has stacked up flat every book ever written about Abraham Lincoln, and it goes up 4 stories.
Oh, wow. Have you ever been, Robin, to the theater?
No, never.
I've never been. I've been to D.C., but I've never been to the Ford Theater.
What's fascinating is that the stagehands had the foresight to get rid of all of the gas lights with the flames.
Yeah.
Well, they were accused of being even more foresighted. There's one poor, abject stagehand named Ned Spangler who had known Booth ever since he was a kid. This guy Spangler had helped build the Booth family home in Bel Air, Maryland. And that afternoon, Booth had come up to Ned in the alley and said, "I need you to help me tonight. Can you help me out tonight with some things, Ned?" And not being very specific. But Ned said, "Sure, John, I'll help you tonight, all you need." And based on that, he was accused of keeping the wing space abnormally clear, even though, of course, they were always clear because women wore hoop skirts backstage and they had to have clear wing space. But based on that testimony about what he had said, Spangler got sentenced to 6 years at hard labor down at Dry Tortugas at Fort Jefferson. And I've been down there. It's a really bleak place.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, what a fascinating interview. Thomas, thank you so much for being on the air with us today. The book, again, is called Backstage at the Lincoln Assassination, The Untold Story of the Actors and Stagehands at Ford's Theater. Thomas A. Bogar is the author and our guest, and his last name is spelled Bogar, if you're looking him up online. Thomas, before we run out of time, do you have a website?
I do, thomasabogard.com.
Okay, easy enough. And is the book available everywhere books are sold?
Everywhere from your local independent bookstore through Amazon or through the publisher Regner History. They've been wonderful. Really, Barnes & Noble has been really good. Books A Million, it's everywhere.
Wow, I'm looking forward to reading more of your work as well. Well, I'll have to look you up. I'm running out of time here, but thank you so much for being on the air with us today.
It was my pleasure. Take care.
What a great interview. We will take a little break, and Fox News is coming up, and we'll be right back.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. The suspected gunman in a shooting at a work